PT on Ice Daily Show. I'm just gonna make sure that we are live on Facebook, starting our connection. Hello everybody on Facebook. My name is Christina Previtt. I am one of the lead faculty for Modern Management of the Older Adult Essential Foundations. Hello everybody who's coming on live on both Facebook and Instagram. With our geriatrics courses, we have 3 that we currently offer. We have our 2 online versions of Modern Management. We have Essential Foundations, which is an 8-week online course with our next cohort starting on the 6th of January. And for those that have taken Essential Foundations and want to deep dive into all things, hi Lindsay, more Geri PT in different clinical special populations, we have our Advanced Concepts course. If you guys are interested, we actually also have a older adult specific bi-monthly email. So every 2 weeks we send out geriatric content to your inbox with our MMOA digest. And so if you haven't signed up for that, I encourage you to do so if you like geeking out about this stuff like me. So today I was actually going to talk a little bit about a comment that we got on Instagram about our geriatrics version of Gutcheck. So you guys know every Thursday, so every Wednesday night, we release a Gutcheck Thursday workout. And in that workout, it's usually low equipment and we just get after it. Last week was that Bergeron beat test and oh my goodness, my lungs were dying. But what I also do is I do a Geri PT version of that workout and a pregnancy and postpartum version of Gutcheck. And usually we make different modifications based on a certain number of assumptions about things that change as we get older or things that change as we navigate into that pregnancy postpartum space in a woman's life. And we got a comment saying, aren't you being ageist by assuming that these changes need to be made when you're working with an older adult? And so I wanted to kind of come on here and talk about that. So number one, I love that people have ageism on their radar, because when Dustin and I started talking about this 5 years ago, the thought of calling an older adult honey bear or sweetie pie or that type of elder speak that we have spoken about a lot for the last couple of years on this podcast was a relatively new construct. And Ashton Applewhite's This Chair Rocks and her ageism talk on TED Talks was very revolutionary and very challenging to sometimes the common convention when it comes to conversing with older adults and having that infantizing type of speak. The second thing is that making the idea around being ageist around that construct with the Geri PT version of Gutcheck is that we are also potentially underdosing or creating a low intensity stimulus for our older adults. And so the second thing that I love is that people are assuming that older adults are able to do more, and we may actually be going like kind of underdosing their exercise program by doing a Geri PT version. And again, I have gone to talks where I've talked about pushing older adults and avoiding when we're at max living and gotten the feedback, I have no idea what I'm talking about. So the fact that people have that on their radar as well around, having our older adults be very capable of doing a lot of the things that our middle-aged or younger adult individuals are able to do is amazing. So I love that. But here's why I think that the Geri PT version of Gutcheck is extremely important. One is when I'm looking at the Geri PT version, I want our Gutcheck to be infinitely scalable. I know that we have a ton of older adults who are in their 70s, 80s, and 90s who are still crushing it in the CrossFit box, and they are still, coming and doing powerlifting meets, and they are doing all of these things. But I do truly believe that we do not have an older adult who is in their 80s who is still doing bar muscle-ups and handstand push-ups. It would be very rare. And so if we're looking at the Geri PT version of Gutcheck, I want it to fit the majority of the older adult population, that average. You're gonna see people on either end of that mean, right? You're gonna see individuals who are lower level and relatively chair bound or bed bound who are not gonna be able to have this workout be accessible to them. And you're gonna have some of our overachievers who do not need the Geri PT version and can do the open version of Gutcheck. And those groups are both doing what they have in their capacity box at that moment. But if we are thinking about the vast majority of Geri PTs, we have people who are working in outpatient, we have people who are working in home health, we have people who are working in skilled nursing facilities, assisted levels of care, or acute care. And I would say, especially for home health, SNF, ALCs, and acute care, being able to do for example, an unassisted body weight sit to stand with full range of motion may not actually be the most common thing that we see. And so by giving options for modifications, we can allow that workout to be accessible to a wider range of individuals who are over the age of 65. And I would argue that most of the clinicians that we are working with in MMOA are seeing people who are over 80 almost exclusively. And if they get an individual in their 70s, they are really seeing somebody who is quite young. And so that's number one. Number two is that we cannot ignore that there are things that change physiologically with age. I am that person as a PT who is going to push that boundary with my client for as long as possible. I am going to try and get them doing everything that they want to do. If they want to be running, we're going to do running drills. If they want to be doing tennis, we're going to be working on cutting drills and pivoting. If they want to be doing CrossFit and they want to be able to do pull-ups, we're going to be working on that shoulder range of motion. But it would be a disservice, I think, for me to not assume that anything is going to change. We know that we are going to preferentially lose type 2 muscle fibers as we get older, whether we train it or not. And we know that from the masters athlete literature that compares masters records between powerlifters and weightlifters and look at them as a percentage of the open record. There is a bigger differential between a masters weightlifter and a masters powerlifter in terms of strength, procurement, and reserve that occurs with age. We just know that that is true. And so if we know that we are going to see power changes as an individual gets older, we know that we're going to have to be making modifications in order to mitigate that change. So we're going to try and train power as much as we can, but also we're going to have some safety considerations from a power and reactive strength perspective that we need to make sure that we're being aware of. So we can't, from a power physiology perspective, we know that we're going to have changes. The same is true in regards to our cardiovascular system and respiratory strength, and it comes to stiffness in joints as well. We know from physiology that we can have individuals who are fairly hypermobile, who are able to maintain their range of motion across different decades of life. But we also know that the average older adult is going to lose between 20 to 30% of the range of motion in their joints when as they get into their 6th, 7th, 8th decade of life. And that we can really be focusing on that flexibility, but that is something that is definitely a use it or lose it principle. And when I think about something like Gutcheck, the biggest one that I'm looking at is probably shoulder range of motion, to try and give you an example of why we need to be cautious. We're going to have some people who are going to be able to maintain that level of thoracic extension that's required to get that glenohumeral joint into that 160 and 180 degrees of flexion. But a lot of our older adults are not going to maintain that. And so we need to make sure that we're not pushing them into a barrier that their body is not ready for, and we're giving them scales and modifications. So the idea behind having a Geri PT version of Gutcheck is not to be making wide sweeping assumptions on what an older adult's capacity is in different phases of their life. When we see people in a CrossFit gym training as a coach, we're probably going to see people who are at the higher end of that physiological reserve, that person that is squaring their trajectory, right? We talk about avoiding when we're at max living and squaring that curve. The idea behind the Geri PT version of Gutcheck was to give clinicians who are working in geriatric settings where the assumption is that we are seeing people who need PT because their reserve is not optimized, to give them options that makes these workouts accessible to them. And why we want to do that is because sometimes we can see some of the workouts and suggestions and exercise ideas that are posted on social media, which are all fantastic. but they're catered and geared mostly to individuals who are working with persons under the age of 65 and who are working in outpatient orthopedics. And so it can be challenging to translate that over to somebody who is working in home health, skilled nursing, acute care, and assisted living facilities. And so the idea behind the faculty of MMOA was to try and take some of those things and transfer them and give you ideas for people who are working with individuals who are lower level. And so you've seen us do reels on ways to implement jump training in individuals who are lower level. Dustin did an amazing job on a reel around having no equipment. Julie was on here yesterday talking about how to take a fitness forward approach with acute low back pain. And so we are trying to serve those physios who are looking at all of this content online and saying, like, this would never work for my setting. Most of my clients are in a wheelchair 99% of their day. And the only way I can get them up is if they're in PT and they're in mid to mod assist and are in active physiotherapy care. And that's why the Geri PT version of Gutcheck came in. And some of our TAs as well, like Alex Germano has done a great job of taking those and showing what it looks like for a client who is lower level. And so I think it's extremely important for us to recognize that we want to be able to modify and scale these workouts for a variety of settings. And it is not our intention to make an assumption that a person is unable to, or we're going to make an assumption of their capacity. And in the descriptions, I always say, you're going to have a person who can do an air squat and doesn't need to modify this to a sit to stand. But this is an option for you, for somebody who is lower level, with the idea that this is geared towards geriatric clinicians who are not working with the master's athlete. I would love to be working with master's athletes all the time, and I consider all of my 65 plus clients to be athletes in their own right. But I also understand that they have a lifetime of injuries, preconceptions around exercise and movement, nutritional things, a bunch of different psychosocial considerations and lifestyle factors that we might need to mediate that is translating over into a decline in reserve. And I also recognize that my clients in their 70s, 80s, and 90s are going to have to do modifications. The odds of getting my client who is 80 years old to be able to hang from a bar is pretty low, potentially. But a ring row is something that is accessible, that is working similar muscle groups. And so the more and more we give these examples about how we can allow these workouts to be accessible to clinicians who are in settings where they're working with lower level clients, can be important. And so I hope you all do not perceive that to be ageist, but more a recognizing of the changes in natural history and physiology that occur with age, but allowing us to remove some of those barriers to exercise by creating a program that is meeting a person where they are at and allows them to be able to move freely within the ranges, movements, and capacity that they are showing up with that day. All right, that is my rant for today. I hope you guys found that helpful. I hope that we aren't coming across as being ageist and more trying to provide a resource for our Geri PTs who are maybe underrepresented in the social media space. And we want to make sure that we can fill that gap so that if you are in SNF, you're in home health, you're in acute care, that you are going to have just as many resources for how to be leveling up some of your clients and working towards getting them stronger, fitter, home, or with increased functional capacity and resiliency. All right, have a wonderful, wonderful Thanksgiving to all of my American colleagues. We had our Thanksgiving a couple of weeks ago, but I hope you all stay safe and are having a couple of restful days off, and I will see you all again soon.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the PT on Ice Daily Show. If you enjoyed this content, head on over to iTunes and leave us a review, and be sure to check us out on Facebook and Instagram at the Institute of Clinical Excellence. If you're interested in getting plugged into more ICE content on a weekly basis while earning CEUs from home, check out our virtual ICE online mentorship program at ptonice.com. While you're there, sign up for our Hump Day Hustling newsletter for a free email every Wednesday morning with our top 5 research articles and social media posts that we think are worth reading. Head over to ptonice.com and scroll to the bottom of the page to sign up.